Golden State Media Concepts Baseball Podcast. We cover everything Major League, from spring training to the World Series. We've got your favorite club covered, from New York to Boston to LA. This is the Golden State Media Concepts Baseball Podcast.
What's going on, everyone, and thanks for tuning in to the GSMC Baseball Podcast, brought to you by the GSMC Podcast Network. I'm your host, Jack Ridenour, and it's going to be a great episode today. I appreciate everyone joining me on the GSMC Baseball Podcast. Hope everyone had a good week. I know for me, this has been a very long week with moving in, getting settled into the new place, trying to set up the internet and Wi-Fi, which always seems to be some sort of nightmare. I don't know how it always happens, but it just does. But regardless, still glad it got figured out, and really glad to be back with all of you today. We've got a really good show for all of you. I'll get into it and start things off. So for today, I'm going to jump into another rundown of some games, some recaps of games on August 6th, Thursday, August 6th to be exact, and some of the latest news in terms of injuries and any other updates around the league. I'll then discuss who my most surprising players are this year so far and who has had a big impact on the year through the first 10 or 12 games so far of the season. Later on, I'll get into another divisional breakdown, this time of the AL West and where I see those teams finishing. Really a top-heavy division that I could see maybe some noise out of those other bottom-barrel teams potentially, but we'll have to see. Stick around for the final few minutes, folks, of the show, because I'll be giving my players to watch for the MVP this year and who I think has the best shot at being crowned the best player in baseball. So I'll get right into it with some recaps, and there's a lot of games tonight. I mean, this is of recording on August 6th, Thursday, so these are just games that just finished not too long ago, so giving you the most up-to-date breakdowns of these games as possible. I'll jump right into it. First game, Brewers, White Sox, and really happy about Milwaukee. I mean, they did a really nice job. I know Adrian Hauser last night on Wednesday had a big start. This was a very interesting game. Brewers came out to, a pretty slow start. Chicago jumped out all over them 2-0 early on in the bottom second, but then Milwaukee put together a run of 5 runs in the next 3 innings. In the third, they got 1 run in the top of the third, and then they got 4 runs in the top of the 5th, and then they closed it out with 3 more runs in the top of the 8th. Chicago only put together 1 more run before ultimately losing 8-3. But what was very interesting and what I was very pleased about was Christian Yelich. He hit a home run tonight, but the most unconventional home run you could possibly think of. He hits a little, I don't want to say a blooper because it was pretty far down the line, but he hits a high pop-up down the third base line, and the left fielder's coming over, completely misreads it, doesn't catch the ball. Now, the ball never hit his glove, so it wasn't an error, but he doesn't come, anywhere really close to the ball. He somehow trips and falls into the netting all along the padding of, where the stands would usually meet, where the field is. The ball then bounces past him. Mind you, Christian Yelich is just moving around the base path. I mean, by the time the guy realized where the ball was, Christian was nearing third, and he got in by about a mile at home. So Christian Yelich, maybe he's out of his slump. I don't know. We'll have to see, because let me tell you what, he has been slumping badly, really badly. Ben Gamel had a tough night, 0 for 6 from the plate. Keston Hiura was 2 for 6 from the plate. Again, I'm a big Keston Hiura guy. I know that he's kind of struggled a little bit this year, but last year what I saw out of him, I was really pleased with. I was really happy, and I was glad that, he's finally started to, kind of come into his own, if you will. I know he's had a little bit of a tough year this year, but again, I think he's going to be a player we're going to hear a lot more about as the years go on. Yohan Moncada had a pretty slow night, 1 for 4 from the plate. He's been hitting .320 though, .893 OPS, so he's been having a big year. Jose Abreu, 1 for 4. He's hitting .268 this year. Yasmani Grandal taking on his former team. He's only batting .250 this year, so about a 30 or 40 point difference from what he was hitting last year. 0 for 3 on the night for him, so good win for the Milwaukee Brewers, 5-5 right now. White Sox now moving to 7-6. Next game, Pirates beating the Twins. Yes, the 3-10 Pirates taking down the 10-3 Twins, 6-5. Really good one. Minnesota jumping out all over Pittsburgh in the top of the first, getting 3 runs on the board. Then Pittsburgh bounced back in the bottom of the third. Minnesota tacks on 2 more runs, one in the 4th and one in the 5th, and then Pittsburgh putting together 3 runs in the 8th and 9th inning total, 1 run in the 8th, 2 runs in the 9th. I mean, I don't want to say that the Pirates are going to make any sort of noise, because they're not, because they're just a team that I have absolutely no faith in them, and I feel really bad saying that, especially with how many friends that I have that are Pirates friends or Pirates fans, and how many people I know that enjoy and watch the Pirates and are big Pirates fans. They just don't have it. They just really don't. And I think until, there's some changes made in the organization and there's some players that start performing at the level and expectation that they're supposed to. Now, Colin Moran, he's been a really big bright spot for them. I have to give him credit. He's done a really, really nice job. But for the most part, I just don't see a whole lot out of them this year. I really don't. Now, the Twins, I'm shocked that they lost, because they've been on an absolute tear as of recently. Nelson Cruz was 1 for 5 from the plate. He's still batting .373. Eddie Rosario, he was 1 for 2. He's only hitting .238, so he's been struggling a little bit. Miguel Sano, he's been struggling mightily, hitting .147. And this is a guy that's got a lot of pop in his bat. So the fact that, Minnesota didn't have much hitting out of him, they really haven't had much hitting out of him at all, and they're still 10-3, that just goes to show you, again, another deep team and a team that has a lot of pieces that can really make a really big push for the playoffs. Next game, Rockies-Giants. Rockies taking down San Francisco 6-4. This was a pretty late scoring game. I mean, nobody scored a run until the bottom of the 6th when Colorado got that first run on the board. San Francisco put on 3 runs in the top of the 7th. Colorado put on 5 in the bottom of the 7th. And then San Francisco put on 1 more run in the top of the 8th, but then that was it. I mean, Colorado was able to seal the deal. 9-3. They're in first place, doing a really, really nice job so far. This is a team that's got some good pieces. Again, Charlie Blackmon, Trevor Story, and I'll mention him later on in the show, Matt Kemp. He's all of a sudden found some, second wind in his career maybe. This might be one of the last few years that he has. It's pretty good. And again, I'll get a little bit more into what Kemp is going to be, what Kemp has been doing this year. But I mean, this could be a team that we could see pretty far into the fall time come postseason, and I'm excited. I think that would be a lot of fun to watch the Rockies play in the postseason. I personally hope that if my Brewers, make the playoffs, they don't have to run into the Rockies, because I think this is a very tough team. But again, I think that this is going to be a franchise that is going to have a pretty big year. I don't want to say a huge year, but a pretty big year. Again, sitting in first place in the NL West, so we'll see how they finish out the year. Next game, Athletics Rangers. A's beating the Rangers 6-4. Again, another pretty good solid showing from the Athletics, and this is a team that I think a lot of people need to take a little bit more serious. They've got a lot of young guys. They've got a lot of young potential and a lot of young, stars in the making. Ramon Laureano, I mean, he's had a really, really good year. 1 for 3 tonight. He's hitting .295. Matt Chapman, he was 0 for 2. He's been struggling. Marcus Semion's been struggling. Matt Olson's been struggling. So these guys, Chris Davis has been struggling. Those 4 guys are 30-plus home run guys. And the fact that they're all struggling and they're all hitting sub 200, that is a very bad sign. But again, they've got some very, very good young pieces, and if they can really build around those guys and really try and, and if those other guys can get out of those slumps that they're in right now, this could be an A's team that we could see, again, like the Rockies, going pretty far into the postseason. Next game, 6-1 final against the Angels and Mariners. LA taking down Seattle. I mean, the Angels jumped out all over Seattle. They jumped out all over them early on. 1 run in the top of the 2nd. They got 3 runs in the top of the 4th. Seattle was able to counter with 1 run in the bottom of the 4th, but then LA put on 2 more in the top of the 8th, and that was really all she wrote for them. And for the Angels, a team that's been pretty, up and down, I would say, for the first part of the season. Rendon's not been hitting well. Mike Trout is out being on paternity leave. Tony La Stella, he's a very good, or Tommy La Stella, he's having a very good year. Or not a very good year. He's having an okay year. But he's a guy that I think could have a very good year. I think he's, again, a guy that's got the potential to be really good. He's got a lot of pop in his bat. He's a big power hitter guy, too. He had a really good year last year, hit .295 last season. So this could be a team that, again, I mean, we might see something out of them, but I really don't think so, because not having Trout, that hurts them big time. That's a big, big blow to their lineup. Brian Goodwin's been hitting well for them. That's a good bright spot for them. But again, not having Trout, that is going to significantly hinder them for, the next couple games and really kind of the further part of the rest of the season, if you will. Next game, Yankees-Phils, and this was a close one. Phillies beating the Yankees 5-4. Philadelphia getting 3 runs in the bottom of the first. Then the Yankees put on 2 in the top of the second. The Phillies put on 2 in the bottom of the third, and then the Yankees put on 2 in the top of the seventh. But that was all she wrote for the Yankees. And again, this is a team, the Yankees. They're scary. They're really, really scary. I mean, they are deep and they're loaded. They've got so much talent. They've got so much hitting. I mean, you run down their entire lineup. You've got Stanton. You've got Gleyber Torres. You've got Brett Gardner, who, even though he's very old, he still gets it done. I don't know how, but he's a fantastic outfielder. Does a really nice job at patrolling the center field. Gio Urshela, he's having a really good year, batting .324. I mean, you look at their lineup, and they've got 3 guys that are hitting 300 or higher, and then they've got, Giancarlo Stanton, who's hitting .294. Not to mention DJ LeMahieu, who's hitting .429. So right there, you're just like, as a pitcher, as a defense of an opposing team, how do you manage maneuvering around so many big pieces like that? I mean, you've got guys in every part of the lineup that can do damage. Through the first hole, the 5-hole hitter, the 7th hole hitter, it doesn't matter. If they're strategically placed around in the lineup, that's a team that literally could win the World Series. I really believe that. And that, I mean, again, it's early on to say that, but I mean, I just don't see, again, especially in their division, I don't really see them running into any problems. I mean, maybe the Rays, but the Red Sox are not good this year. The Orioles, I think that's a little bit of a fluke on their end, and the Blue Jays aren't going to be good either. So the Yankees have it in the bag in their division. But again, can they keep up with teams like the Twins, the Astros, the Athletics? I think they personally can. I mean, they whomped on the Twins last year in the playoffs, so they've shown that they are able to, take down other strong, formidable opponents in the AL. We'll see if they're able to do that this year. Now, this next score, this was a disaster if you're a Cincinnati Reds fan. 13-0 decision. The Cleveland Indians coming out on top of the Cincinnati Reds, and it was a huge bottom 7th inning for Cleveland. 10 runs. Yes, they scored 10 runs in the bottom of the 7th. First off, if I was a fan, I mean, again, there's no fans in the stands, obviously, this year. But if I was a fan and I was sitting there watching that, I would feel like a whole lifetime passed in that inning. 10 runs in the bottom of the 10th. That is unbelievable. I mean, just looking at the guys that had some big hits, they had guys that went 2 for 4, 3 for 5. It was just... And you got to think about it this way. Francisco Lindor only went 1 for 3. Jose Ramirez, he went 3 for 5. I mean, come on. Jose Ramirez is hitting .308, and he's hitting second in their lineup. If you got a guy that's hitting that high of a batting average, that high in the lineup, again, that's always a great thing to have. So we'll see how the Reds do for the rest of the year. I'm going to get into, Nick Castellanos and a little bit about what he can do this year and how good of a year he's having. But, I mean, the Cleveland Indians as a whole, they're going to be a playoff team. They really are going to be a playoff team. Next game, Royals-Cubs, and again, it was another whomping. Royals beating the Cubs 13-2, and the 4-10 Royals getting it done against the Cubs, and this was a game where Kansas City was rolling throughout the entire game. They score 1 run in the first, 2 in the second, and they score 6 in the third. So already by the 4th inning, you've got a 9-0 ball game, and if you're Chicago, first off, I've never seen a team come back from, a larger deficit like that throughout an entire game. I will say there was one game I watched. It was a Phillies game many years ago against the Dodgers. They were down 9-2. I think it was in the 8th inning, and they wound up winning in, I think, either extras or in, the bottom of the 9th, and it was a 10-9 or 11-9 decision. And that was probably one of the wildest comebacks I've ever seen in my entire life, and I couldn't believe what I was watching, honestly. But again, if you're a team that's usually putting teams away like that early on in the game and separating yourself from your opponent, it's really hard if you're the other team to climb out of that hole. It's really tough. So hats off to the Royals for getting out all over the Cubs. Big win for them. Next game, D-backs, Astros. D-backs winning 5-4. I mean, the Astros, they're I don't want to say they're struggling, but they're not the team they were last year. They're not the team they were in 2018. They're not the team they were in 2017. This is a totally different Astros team. And with the guys that they have right now not hitting well, I mean, Altuve's hitting 192. Bregman's hitting 235. Brantley is a great hitter. And again, I'm going to get into him a little bit later, but he's batting 389, so that's a very good sign from them. Carrera's hitting well, 386. But Reddick's hitting 238. I mean, you're not getting a whole lot of production, especially out of guys like Springer and Altuve, and those are two guys that are always very consistent for them and always come through for them. So if they can get it going a little bit, maybe the Astros make a little bit of a run, but we'll have to see. Next game, Braves, Blue Jays. This was a close one. Braves actually winning in the bottom of the ninth, 4-3. Atlanta jumped out all over Toronto, 2-0 in the bottom of the first. Both teams put up a run in the fourth inning, and then Toronto put up 2 runs in the top of the seventh. So they went out ahead, they tied it up in the top of the seventh, and then Atlanta wound up winning it in the bottom of the ninth inning. Nick Markakis with a big walk-off homer. I mean, a guy that's, again, he's another guy that's got a second win in his career that, I don't want to say he's old, because for baseball, you can be 30, 31, 32 and still be very productive and still, be an all-star and still have really good years. I mean, there's lots of guys that are in their early 30s right now that are putting up probably career numbers, if you will. So Nick Markakis still getting it done at the age that he's at. A big walk-off for him. Congrats to the Braves. That was a big win for them tonight. Next game, Marlins and Orioles. Yes, the Marlins were back. They were back on the field after their very, very long layover. I know that they've been back, slowly a little bit. 6-1 so far this year, actually. So, a really good start for Miami. Who knows if, the COVID-19 stuff hasn't bothered them and hasn't affected them greatly. I know that they've had one guy step off of the team because of, the fear of catching it, and they've had so many people that have caught it and, tested positive for it. But big win for them against the Orioles is, a good back-and-forth game, really. The first inning, bottom one, Miami puts on the first run, and then Baltimore and Miami both tack on a run each in the second inning. Then they both tack on 2 runs in the third inning. Baltimore puts on 1 in the top of the fourth, and then Miami adds 2 to their total in the bottom of the fourth. Baltimore puts on 2 in the top of the sixth. Marlins wound up winning 8-7. They put on 2 in the bottom of the seventh, and the Orioles weren't able to do a whole lot else after that. So hats off to the Miami Marlins. Maybe this is a year where, who knows, they could come out and make some noise. The year of the COVID-19 season could be the Miami Marlins season. I really doubt that, because it's the Marlins, right? How realistic is that? But again, we don't know. We never know, and that's the beauty of baseball. You never know. 2 games were postponed. Unfortunately, one of them being the Detroit Tigers and the Cardinals. They did not play tonight because of the recent testings for the Cardinals. Actually, their entire series this whole week against the Tigers has been canceled. Their whole series against the Brewers last weekend was also canceled. So a lot of cancelings going on. The Marlins had already a lot of cancellations, and there's been many teams affected by this, and it's really unfortunate. It is. It's really unfortunate that, these teams are going down with really big, I don't want to say big cancellations, but early on in this season, not having the games that, you want to have in order to, who knows, they might have, some of these teams, if they're, let's say you get a couple cancellations early on in the year, and you've already come out to a pretty slow start. You get your feet back, and you kind of get back into a rhythm, come, a week or so after everything, if there's any cancellations or whatever, the following week, let's say. And then all of a sudden, you go on a 7 or 8 game winning streak. Well, you're already kind of in a hole if you're a team that's had a losing record before any cancellations. So you're kind of playing catch up, and you're against the clock right now because it's, not as many games in even fewer days. And if you can't make up that ground, it's going to be really hard. It's going to be really, really tough for you as a team, as an organization. But again, we'll see what happens with that. Now, some injuries to go around the league with. Nick Madrigal, he was placed on the 10-day injured list for the Chicago White Sox. He left the club's matchup against the Brewers. Max Scherzer also having to leave the game, not today on Thursday, but on Wednesday for an undisclosed reason. Again, only threw 27 pitches, and he went out. And Steven Strasburg also not playing either. Both of them having some injuries. And Steven Strasburg, he's been out for a while. He was scheduled to pitch on Wednesday, but there's no set of return for him. And if you're the Nationals, having your top 2 guys in your rotation go down with injuries, that is never a good sign at all. The Braves have placed Ozzie Albies on the 10-day injured list, as well as Matt Adams. So again, having Ozzie Albies out of the lineup for the Braves, it didn't really seem to bother them that much tonight because they got the win, but still, having one of your young superstars out is never a good sign at all. But again, we'll see. Robert Osuna and Michael Brantley both out for the Astros. Brantley's dealing with a quad injury, and it kept him out of Tuesday's game against the D-backs. He's been, kind of having a tough go of it ever since that whole ordeal with the Dodgers and the Astros happened last week. Joe Kelly stepped on his foot, so when Joe Kelly was going over to cover first base. So, I mean, obviously did not happen in the whole scuffle of all that, but again, always a tough blow when Michael Brantley, who's really been one of the only hitters on that Astros team and in that Astros lineup, is doing anything, and he's out. Mike Moustakas has also been on the injured list now. He's been, hampered with injuries. Tough blow for the Reds. I mean, you've already got Castellanos and Moustakas have been the only guys on that team that have done anything in terms of hitting. And having Moustakas out, now you're putting all the load on Castellanos. I mean, that's really hard. That is very, very tough. Now, this for the Pirates is a huge blow. Nick Burdi, who everybody in the city of Pittsburgh is a big fan of, he's a young guy, has a lot of potential. He's been placed on the 45-day injured list with a elbow injury. He'll probably be out for the season, and, I mean, he was serving actually as the closer while Keone Kela was supposed to be coming back. And, I mean, Burdi's already had Tommy John surgery, and that's not a good sign if he's got to be out again, a young budding superstar for the Pirates. And, for them, that comes very infrequently for them, especially in the pitching department. So that's never a very good sign at all. But yeah, just a couple injuries going around the league, a couple scores going around the league, just some general information, news, whatever else has been going on. Thankfully, so far, there hasn't been any other crazy COVID positive testings that have been going on either. Now, again, that is something that is changing each and every single day, so we could hear more about that in the coming days, in the coming weeks, so we're going to have to stay tuned for that one. But it's going to be, a very, very interesting season, to say the least. A lot of good games on Thursday, August 6th, and hopefully some of these guys can come back from these injuries. Again, Michael Brantley for the Astros, need to get him back. Moustakas for the Reds, need to get him back. Ozzie Albies, again, they didn't really seem to miss him tonight, but they're going to need to get him back also. So, again, we've got some stuff to look forward to, and if you're a fan of some of those teams that have some of those big guys that are injured, it's going to be all right, because nobody is really seriously injured. Unless you're a Pirates fan, having Nick Burdi out of the lineup is a big blow, because now your bullpen is even smaller than it was before. So if you're a Pirates fan, I am sorry, because that's got to really stink. That is a big, big blow. So, folks, that's going to close it out for our first segment today. Everyone, thanks so much for listening. Don't go anywhere, because after the quick break, I'll be back discussing some really good stuff, some most surprising players so far this year who has really shocked me and I think has caught a lot of attention, not only from myself, but other people in the baseball world and just fans in general. So stick around, folks, because we'll be right back here on the GSMC Baseball Podcast.
This is your ultimate stop for everything sports. The Golden State Media Concepts Sports Podcast. Should I say more? From the NFL, MLB, the NBA, to MMA, it's all in here. The Golden State Media Concepts Sports Podcast. Listen now.
Welcome back, everyone, to the GSMC Baseball Podcast. Jack Ridenauer again, and segment one was centered around recaps from games on August 6th, some injury updates, other news floating around the league. But, folks, don't go anywhere, because later on in this show, I'll be sharing my top choices for the MVP trophy this year and who I think will be crowned the best player in the MLB. I want to now discuss the most surprising players for me so far this season, who has really, shocked me, and I think a lot of other people out there also with their performance so far this season. There have been many surprises this year so far in terms of which players have been struggling mightily early on. Christian Yelich having a rough go at it from the plate. Jose Altuve also struggling, and many other stars that normally perform pretty well have otherwise not played to their normal, typical level. But there have been a lot of players that have been, great, kind of, I don't want to say finds, but almost great surprises, if you will, and that have really burst onto the scene this year and could keep this momentum going throughout the rest of the season. So I'll get into which players I think have been the most surprising this year thus far. My first player, it's got to be Jacoby Jones. I mean, Jones has come out swinging literally this season throughout the first 10 games of the season. The center fielder for the Tigers has been a big, bright spot for them, batting .379 so far with an impressive 1.212 OPS in his 29 at-bats, and this is a huge improvement from from a year ago. In 2019, he batted .235. He did miss a good portion of the season, only played in 88 games, but this year he seems to be a totally different player. 3 home runs so far with 7 RBIs. Jacoby has the ingredients for a big year. He's never hit higher than 11 homers in a year and never had more than 34 RBIs. Now, will he have monster numbers this year? I don't think so, simply because of the shortened season, but in relation to this year and what a monster year might look like because of the far fewer games, he could have himself a big season. His slugging percentage has also, jumped up big time at a .739 clip right now, and you can tell his numbers are drastically improving each and every single year. He had never been around anywhere between 600 in slugging until this year, and his on-base percentage is over 100 points higher this year than it was last year. This is a guy who a lot of people, and I think a lot of players, love, he's a guy that, like a lot of players, he loves playing in his home ballpark. He's batting 421 at Comerica this year, 300 on the road, which is actually very good considering guys do struggle on the road, but his OPS at home is astronomically high, 1.371 this year and 900 on the road. So a guy that can really get it done both on the road, at home, it doesn't really matter. And it makes me, wonder if he's going to be a guy that, possibly could fizzle out come game 55 or 60, and he, could go back to his old ways. But this could also be the beginning to a great career for him. He is 28, which is a little older, but he still has, I'd say, at least 4 or so more good years in him. So this could be a name people should, very well get familiar with. My second player that I want to mention that I think has been a huge, huge surprise, Ryan Yarbrough, with the, Tampa Bay's pitching, pitcher for the Tampa Bay Rays, and their pitching is very strong. I mean, they got Charlie Morton, Blake Snell, and Tyler Glasnow, and people, I think, forget about Yarbrough. I mean, he should not be left out of the equation because he's having really the best year in his career so far. Third-year pitcher has seen a steady progression in his play, and with this year being, the best in terms of ERA for him at a 3.78 ERA, big drop from last year's 4.13 ERA. A high winning pitcher coming off an 11-6 year. He has yet to register a win this season, but don't let the record fool you, because I think, for the most part, pitchers' records can be very deceiving because they can have a great statistical year, but it just so happens whenever they were on the mound for their team that day, the bats just did not support the pitcher. And there's lots of guys that I can remember and I can come up with that have really, that's been a very constant thing for them. And one of them is Strasburg. Steven Strasburg, he's had many years where his win-loss is not the greatest, but he's got such high strikeouts and such a low ERA. People, they might look at the record at first, and at first glance, it's like, ooh, you're not having a great year because your record is, 10-9 or, 9-11. But you still have 200-plus Ks, you have under a 3 ERA, you're still having a great year. And that's why I think that, records are a little bit of a misnomer in terms of how you view stats, so I don't always look at records very heavily. I mean, it is great to have a guy that does get a lot of wins, but again, you got to look at the other numbers and the other statistics that especially pitchers have. Yarbrough tends to pitch better on the road, as his opponents only have a 105 batting average, and when he's playing on the road, he's literally lights out. And at home, he is giving up, a little bit more. I mean, opponents are hitting 279 against him when they're at the Trop, so, that's kind of ironic. Guy that's able to really get it done on the road, but when he's at home, he seems to struggle just a little bit more. His ERA on the road is also half of what it is at home, with him giving up just under 3 runs a game away and almost 4.5 runs at the Trop. Not a huge distance pitcher, meaning doesn't always go very deep into the game, tends to be a very solid pitcher through about 6 innings or so. So if you're the Rays and you look at him as a great starter who can come in, keep the runs at a minimum, but won't go deep into the ball game, which at times it could hurt your team, but again, it's a great sign about him. He's a very good pitcher getting out of jams, and I think that is where he really thrives. He can keep the runners from advancing to second, which a lot of pitchers, when they get guys on base, they tend to, it's kind of a snowball effect, and it's those guys that are some of the best and the cream of the crop, if you will, that are able to minimize that advancing of the runners or even getting anybody else on base. So far this season, opponents are batting 167 against him with runners on first, but that jumps up almost 100 points for the other team when the runner is at second. So as long as he keeps the guys off the base path or only on first, he is effective, very, very effective. Do I think he's going to have a superstar year and be a superstar for years to come? Not necessarily, but I do think he could be a very good, solid pitcher for years to come. But I am very surprised by his strong start, and against, I'm not looking at his record again because this is not always a reflection of the pitcher. But his ERA is lower than it's been, and he's already pitched in 16 2/3 innings through 3 games. He started, so he's come out and done a very good job for a solid, 5 or 6 innings whenever he's been on the mound, and that's really all the Rays can ask for. And if he's, maybe the 3rd or 4th option in that rotation, I mean, he's a fantastic 3rd or 4th option because they've got some other guys on that pitching staff that are very, very good. My 3rd player that I'm very surprised with, and this came as a huge surprise to me the other day when I was on the internet and I came across his numbers, and that's Matt Kemp. I mean, at one point this year, he was hitting .385, which is a massive increase from the average he finished the year with last year, which was .200. I mean, you're jumping up 185 points in your batting average. That's very hard to do. Now, that average has dropped down some to .292, but again, he's nearing that 1,000 OPS mark, and he's got 8 RBIs and 24 at-bats. So in a third of his at-bats so far, he's driving in runs, which is incredibly productive, especially if you're 35 years old and nearing the end of your career. He's been a consistent .270 or so hitter throughout the latter part of his career since about, 2013, 2014 or so. But last year was by far his worst season. And I think what is so shocking is how well he's played so far, and he's getting older. There's no sign of him finding the fountain of youth. This guy is, maybe have 1 to 3 years left in him at the most. And of course, his numbers are better at home than away, obviously, especially with how the atmosphere is in Colorado. Everyone agrees it is very easy to tee off on balls at Coors Field with how thin the air is. So for a guy like Kemp, that is a best-case scenario for him, no question about it. Now, there are signs of him potentially starting to, digress a little bit and revert back to his old ways. He came out swinging hard in July, batting .333 for the month, but that has since fallen to .250 in the early part of August. But I still think this is a big, surprising year for Kemp. He seems to have a little something left in the tank at 35, and for me, it's shocking to see him still be productive, mainly because those stellar years in L.A. were kind of, the last of, I don't want to say the peak of his career, because he did have some decent years in Atlanta, but he really hasn't done anything in his career since those years. So this may be one final run for Kemp, but if it is, he's ending his career on a very, very solid note. Now, my next guy, this is a guy who, if you're a Brewers fan like myself, you don't have very fond memories of, and that's Trent Grisham. I mean, mainly for his fielding blunder he had in the wild card last year, where the ball went under his glove in the outfield, allowing the Nationals to move guys into scoring position and also allowing a run to score. But he has found a second career in San Diego this year, and he is a part of a very, very, very solid young core group of guys who are going to do a lot of damage this year, and for many years to come. I really believe that. I think this team has got so much potential, and I think in about 2, maybe 3 years, we're definitely going to start hearing more and more about this team. In 48 at-bats this year, he has a .271 average, but a .990 OPS, so that's telling me he's hitting for power, and for a guy that hits leadoff, or at least in those first 3 spots in the lineup, that is a really good thing to have if you're the Padres, because it shows you have weapons in any part of the lineup. He's a consistent hitter on both the road and at home, and his OPS has been very high so far this season. So, I mean, in either situation, it doesn't matter if he's at home, away, it doesn't matter. And it's a great sign for San Diego that he can get it done both away and at home. What really jumps out to me, though, is his batting average so far this season with a guy on first. He's batting .429 in that situation, and with guys on both first and second, he's hitting .333. So this perfectly explains those power numbers he's putting up this year. He is also a much better hitter when he is behind in the count, which is very unique. I mean, guys that usually are behind in the count, they tend to, buckle up a little bit and not really, it's really the pitcher's game at that point, especially if you're a hitter. But with a .353 clip in that, situation, in contrast to .286 when he's ahead in the count, that's even more fascinating. I mean, that's nearly a 100-point difference when your back's against the wall in, a pitcher-batter duel. And when he's, ahead in the count, he does not hit as well. Very unique. Very, very unique. He added 40 points in a year to his average, and he also added over 200 points to his OPS. So he's a young player with a ton of upside, and if you're a Padres fan, I think you will have much better memories of him as opposed to Brewers fans, that's for sure. My next guy, he had a great year last year, but he has really exploded onto the scene this year, and that's Christian Vasquez. Talk about a guy who's come out of the gates hot, in the top 10 this year in just about every major hitting category. The Red Sox catcher is having himself a surprise career year. He's building off of the year he had last season, like I mentioned, where he batted .276 with 23 homers and 72 RBIs. This year, through his first 40 at-bats, he already has 4 homers and 10 RBIs to go along with a .966 OPS. He seems to be the only, or I should say one of the few, bright spots in this Red Sox team that otherwise has been struggling incredibly so far this year. Batting .308 this season, hasn't struggled that bad against righties or lefties. He's considerably better so far this year against lefties, which makes sense as he's a right-handed batter, but he still is hitting .286 against righties. That's still a very solid percentage to have, especially as a right-handed batter. The most promising, I see in Vasquez this year that could set him up for the future. He has a knack for driving in runs. I think that's going to be a big part of his game for years to come. He's batting .300 or higher with men on base, and he's hitting .500 with guys in scoring position. He has been on an upward trend both last year and this year. So although it is surprising to see him up there with guys like Judge and Carrera, it is still realistic for him to be such a strong hitter with his numbers recently being on an upward trend. The jump he has made has been the most shocking, though, and how drastic the improvement has been. I really got to tip my hat to Mr. Vasquez, no question about it. My next guy, Lance Lynn, I wrote this guy off a while ago. I'm not going to lie, and I probably should not have done that. The 33-year-old pitcher, he still gets it done, and I don't know how he's doing it, but he's able to, he's caught that second win in his career, and his numbers show it. He's leading the league in a wildly low ERA. You look at his ERA and you're like, is that even real? He's under a .50 ERA and through 18 in the third innings pitched this season. That's unbelievable. He's only given up one earned run in his entire time on the mound this year, and he struck out 24 batters. So he's averaging about 8 Ks a game early on this year, and he's practically been untouchable. If you're striking out 8 guys a game through the first 3 games and you don't even have a 1 ERA, I don't know how you're able to go up as a hitter confidently knowing, hey, I can definitely hit this guy this year. Not when he's literally untouchable. For a Texas Rangers team that has struggled this year, it's a great bright spot to see Lynn pitching this well, and whether he's on the road or at home, it doesn't faze him. As hitters, they're batting under 200 in either venue, so it doesn't matter where he's pitching. He is dominating in each start. The one thing that I wouldn't be shocked about is if age starts to kick in for Lynn, and we start to see him plateau a little bit this season. But with a start like this, I don't see him having a downfall. Rather, this could be a second wave of success for Lynn. We could really see some rejuvenation in his career, not this year, but maybe for years to come. And you always hear about guys that, a guy that I like to point out that I noticed was not great in the beginning of his career, but as he went on as a pitcher, he got better and better and better, and he actually was an all-star more often as he was older than he was younger, and that's Zach Greinke. That's another guy that I think, maybe Lance Lynn, he could be, following in those footsteps, having a pretty solid career leading up to this year, but all of a sudden just really finding that peak of performance at the, age of 33, 34, whatever it might be, and that right there, that's really hard to do. That is a very, very tough thing to do, especially if you're that old and you've been around that long. My last guy that I think has been an absolute surprise for me, and I don't know if anyone out there agrees or doesn't or disagrees, but Kyle Lewis. He's been a huge piece for the Mariners this year so far, increasing his batting average total over 100 points from a year ago. He went from 268 to 385, and he's already halfway to his home run total of a year ago where he hit 6 bombs. With 3 homers and 10 RBIs this season, he is well on his way to a much bigger year. Really big numbers when he's on the road batting, .448, and to have such a higher batting average on the road as opposed to home, that is again very, very shocking. But I will say his numbers have dipped down big time. From July to August, his average dropped from .455 to .263, and he tends to have a higher average when guys aren't on base as opposed to when they are on base. So a guy that can get on base himself but doesn't drive in a whole bunch of runs per se. Now this year he has driven in 10 runs, so he can do it. He's capable of it, but he tends to be a better hitter when no one is on base, but he still has been a great surprise for this Mariners team this season. And really, I think this Mariners team, and I'll get into it in my AL West breakdown this year, they could have themselves a huge year, and I think they're kind of one of those teams that's, I don't want to say they're a fringe team, but they could go either, they swing either way. They could either be in the first half of their division or the latter half of their division. They've been up and down the last, couple years. They really haven't been anything in the last 2 years at least. So So if they're able to use this momentum from Lewis, if Daniel Vogelbach is able to get going, I know he's been struggling mightily from the plate, and if they can really find a kind of a groove, Lewis could really lead them into a playoff position, and, who knows, in a couple years, they might find themselves being one of the top dogs in that division in the West. That'll close it out here for us in this second segment, folks, but don't go anywhere, because coming up, I'll get into my breakdown of the AL West and share who I think can thrive in the division and come out on top at the end of the year, and who is going to have a harder time keeping up with their divisional rivals. Stay right there, everyone. We will be right back here on the GSMC Baseball Podcast.
Tired of searching the vast jungle of podcasts? Now listen close and hear this out. There's a podcast network that covers just about everything that you've been searching. Hey! The Golden State Media Concepts Podcast Network is here. Nothing less than a podcast bliss with endless hours of podcast coverage. From news, sports, music, fashion, cooking, entertainment, fantasy, football, and so much more. So stop lurking around and go straight out to the Golden State Media Concepts Podcast Network. Guaranteed to fill that podcast itch. Whatever it may be, visit us at www.gsmcpodcast.com. Follow us on Facebook and Twitter, and download us on iTunes, SoundCloud, and Google Play.
Welcome back to the GSMC Baseball Podcast. Great to have you all still here with me, tuning in. Jack Ridenour with you, and we just wrapped up another discussion talking about the most surprising players thus far this season and who's been making a lot of noise in this pandemic-shortened year. As usual, I want to get into another divisional breakdown. Since last week I covered the NL Central, I want to now get back into the AL and discuss the AL West, a very interesting division, especially with how it's been playing out recently. This division is very different from the Central in both the AL and NL, mainly because there isn't as even, there's not as even of a spread amongst the teams as there is in the Central. This is a pretty top-heavy division, meaning that after those top two teams, things really drop off in terms of talent and ability, but this might be a year where things are pretty even atop the leaderboard. So I'll jump right into it and who I think is going to be number one this season, and this is a team that for the last two seasons has really made a push for the playoffs, putting together back-to-back 97-win seasons after being dead last in 2017, and that's the Oakland Athletics. I really think that this team could come out on top in first place. This is a team that has a lineup that includes at least 3 to 4 players that can be consistent 30-plus home run type hitters. Some have struggled early on, but they have a lot of young stars making some noise in the Bay Area, and that we could really hear more about in the years to come, and especially with the team is in the prime to make a run. I think that this is a team that, 2 straight second-place finishes. They've been building and developing talent for the last few years. They are in that window you hear about where teams that are similar, or, I don't want to say similar, but smaller market that have huge years, they usually have a very short amount of time to win, maybe 3 or 4 years at the max, and they've kept the same group of guys from last year, bringing back Marcus Semien and Matt Chapman, who both hit 30 or more homers last year, Chris Davis, who is very capable of hitting at least 30 home runs or more in a season. Now, all 3 of those guys have struggled greatly in the early part of the season, but they're younger players who have started to come out of their minor league system. They've really stepped up. One of those guys being Jesus Luzardo, 22-year-old lefty that absolutely shoved in his first career MLB start this season. Coming out of the bullpen last year, he had some strong appearances for the A's. He threw a 1.50 ERA with 16 Ks over 12 innings. This year, he's already thrown for 12 Ks in 3 games, with an impressive starting debut where he went 5 innings, giving up 2 hits and keeping the Rangers scoreless. I mean, this guy's got a lot of potential. And in terms of their promising position players, now Ramon Laureano is another guy that's really stepped up to the plate big time to fill that hitting void. So having Luzardo and having Laureano both in your lineup, young guys, those are 2 guys that you could really build for the future and potentially, if you can keep at least Semien or maybe Chapman around and build with those 2 young guys, you could really start to build for the future, and they might be able to have to be a team that could potentially have that window extended from 3 to 4 years to maybe 5 to 6 years. Teams like the A's or the Royals, the Brewers, the Pirates, these teams that are smaller markets They can't win with having massive payrolls. They just don't have the money to do that. They can't keep up financially with the Red Sox, the Yankees, the Dodgers, and so as a result, they really have to focus on developing talent. And the A's, I mean, they're a team that I think every single small market team needs to take a piece out of their playbook, because this team has, I don't know how they've done it, but they have done a fantastic job for many years. And, I mean, there's a movie about it, Moneyball. Of course. And as a result, they've really followed that kind of trend of finding guys that are productive and are efficient and, not looking at those specific, how many home runs is a guy hitting, how many RBIs does he have, but looking at baseball in a different way. And the A's, I mean, they really changed the way teams look at how, you develop talent in-house. This is, another thing. Laureano, he's hitting 300 with a 975 OPS and 10 RBIs. So he's someone that can bring in a lot of runs, and if guys can get on base, he can do the rest. He hit 288 with an 860 OPS last season, 24 bombs. So this A's team is chock full of home run hitters, which can be a problem for a lot of teams in the West. A team that generates a lot of runs, as we could probably guess from their high-powered offense. Last year they were 8th in the league in runs scored per game, while only being 16th in the league in teams. Unbelievable to do. I mean, if you're anybody in the MLB and you're able to efficiently get that many guys on base without having any sort of issues in terms of, having an astronomically high batting average, you're doing something right. You're doing something right, whatever that might be. And they did a really nice job at keeping their strikeout numbers low last year, only having 8 per game as a whole, but they are 26th in the league this year in Ks per game with 10. So that number has gone up a little bit, again, a little bit early on in the season, but we're still about a quarter of the way through, so there's still about, 75% left, but 25% is already gone. They are 4th this year in walks per game, which is a huge improvement from last year where they were 10th, which is still a good spot to be, but improving the walks and backtracking with the strikeouts per game is a little bit of an offset for them. So hopefully they can get back to the patience that they had at the plate from last year. They are sitting at first right now, so they could get some added help from the usual guys that can produce from the plate, and the young players continue to excel early on. They could really, really, really take advantage of this shortened season and potentially find themselves in first place. Now, the second place team that I think they're pretty much a deadlock, I think, and I think it's going to be a vying for first place between these two teams, the A's and the Houston Astros. And I think that the Astros will eventually fall into second place. I think they have a ton to prove from the offseason allegations and scandal that circled the team with the cheating and the using of signs to decipher pitches. They've already had a big loss to their rotation, losing Garrett Cole in the offseason, who is by far one of the top 3 pitchers in the league, and also with Justin Verlander going down with an early season elbow injury, and who knows when he'll be back. Sitting in second right now, I just don't think that they have the pitching that they had a year ago to be dominant. I think obviously they had a ton of hitting, but their pitching was unbelievable. But do they have a deep hitting? Like I mentioned, the Dodgers and the Yankees, they've got deep hitting, and so do the Astros, but this year they're really not getting it done. I mean, Michael Brantley and Carlos Correa are both hitting above 400, which to have a team that have 2 guys hitting that, high of a percentage, let alone one guy, that's very hard to do. But guys like George Springer, Jose Altuve, Reddick, they're all hitting sub 240, and with Springer and Altuve both hitting under the Mendoza line, they are, again, guys who have struggled mightily early on in the season. You can just add them to the list of many superstar baseball players that have had a tough time right out of the gates. This team, I think, is very different from a year ago, where they led the MLB in a lot of offensive categories like walks per game, runs per game, and strikeouts, where they only were striking out 7 times a game last year. This year, they are 12th, and I think we all know why those numbers have changed. But again, their pitching is going to hurt them in the long run. No Verlander, no Cole. Greinke is struggling this year with a 5 ERA. Lance McCullers got rocked the other day, gave up 8 runs against the D-backs. He has a 9.22 ERA. 9.22. If you are in a starting pitching rotation in the MLB and you have that high of an ERA, that is never a good sign. I mean, I know I mentioned, about guys having not great of records but having great statistics. I would take a guy that has 7-9 record but a 1.80 ERA and 200 some strikeouts over a guy that's got a 10-7 record with 185 strikeouts and an 8 or 9 ERA. Now, obviously, if a guy has that high of an ERA, I don't expect him to have a winning record. But still, the point is, having that, looking at that number carries so much more weight than I would say a pitching record, and that's how I'm viewing it. But I think that the ERA is weighed much more than the record is. And again, a lack of hitting and a lack of pitching as opposed to last year. This team, I think, is going to be a nice fit for second. But don't be shocked if they slip to third. I mean, I could see that happening as well. I really could. If Altuve, Springer, these guys aren't able to get going, and if who knows with Brantley, if he starts struggling at all, which I really don't think that's going to happen. I mean, the guy's absolutely lights out from the plate this year, so who knows what will happen with that, but I really do think that this is going to be a second-place team for sure. Now, third place, and this is going to be a big hot take, and I know I said the Angels would be a good team to take advantage of this shortened season, but now we have played some games, and for some reason, I have a lot of faith in the Seattle Mariners. I'm not quite sure why, but this is a team that has been up and down the last few years, as I mentioned in my last segment, alternating between 500 finish and a sub-500 finish the last 4 years, with them winning 89 games in 2018. So they're capable of getting things done. They're able to win ball games. I mean, that's only 2 years ago that they were knocking at the door for 90 wins. They are last right now, but don't let that fool you. Again, they have some guys who have really been producing for them this year. Austin Nola, who's hitting 300 and approaching that 900 OPS mark. Center fielder Kyle Lewis, again, I mentioned him in the last segment. He leads the team in OPS with a 1.016 OPS and 3 homers already. And Kyle Seager, who's batting a very solid 326 in that 5-hole of the lineup. They've seen a slight improvement from a year ago in terms of scoring runs. Last year they were 19th with 4.68 runs per game to 16th, but they have generated less runs with 4.33 this season. Again, not that big of a difference, but still, if they're generating a little bit less of runs this year as opposed to last year, yeah, that could be a little bit of cause of concern. But again, they've got guys in their lineup that can get it done at the plate, and that is, I think, the biggest thing right there. If they can get guys on base and they can move them around, the rest of, Lewis, Seager, they'll take care of the rest. They have taken advantage of some teams starting slow, though, one of them being the Astros, and if they can keep being that pesky team in the West, they can muster their way into a third spot in the division. I really do believe that. Now, their pitching is a big red flag. Multiple guys with a 4 ERAs or higher, a few guys with an 8 to 9 ERA, and they don't really have anyone that can be a dominating pitcher or can really be an ace at all, which could be an issue for them later in this season. I will say, Carl Edwards Jr. is a very solid guy to come out of the bullpen. He's a hard thrower. He's got a 1.93 ERA, 6 Ks in 4 2/3 of work this year. So he is someone that is, if the starters can get it done and they can get through 5-6 innings, he can at least come in and keep opposing teams at bay and limit as little of runs in 7-8 inning situations as possible. If they can pick up the hitting a little more and really fix the pitching and get a couple guys to start humming from the mound, watch out, because I think the Mariners could make a big push for that third spot. Now, number 4, and this is a team that I was very sold on before the season started, but now that we've started to play some baseball, I'm unfortunately, I don't want to say I'm losing faith, but it's definitely slipping each and every day. The LA Angels. I mean, they're a good team. I'm not knocking them, or anything from them, but I don't think that they have performed to the standard that I expected them to. And really, other people probably have also, felt the same. They haven't finished above 500 since 2015. And when you have the best player in baseball and Mike Trout on your team and can't finish above 500 for consecutive years, that is pretty bad. That is, again, they haven't had a whole lot of help for him. They haven't surrounded him with, I think, the correct pieces until recently. Still, if you can't even just crack 500 with him in your lineup, I think that's a very, very poor sign. They did add Anthony Rendon in the offseason, but he struggled mightily so far. He's hitting 148. Shohei Ohtani, he went down with a right forearm strain that might sideline him for the year in terms of pitching, and his ability to hit and pitch is a huge asset. But without his arm in the rotation, that'll hurt them big time. They have 7 guys, and this is what's wild, and I couldn't believe it when I was, on the internet looking at their statistics. They've got 7 guys hitting under 220 in their starting lineup. But I will say, Brian Goodwin has been hitting the ball well, batting .294 in a more reserved role. But I think, to make note, their starting 5 pitching rotation, they've all been very consistent. They have 3 guys that are 2 ERAs or lower. So they've got guys that are able to keep runners at a minimum. They're able to keep runs at a minimum. Andrew Heaney throwing 15 Ks in the 3 games he's played in so far, but their closer, Ty Buttrey, he's given up 4 earned runs already, and he's got a 5.68 ERA. If you're a closer, you can't give up that many runs, especially in the situation you are coming in with a ninth inning setup. That can't happen. You can never have that happen. If your closer has anything higher than a 3 ERA, I think you need to find a new closer, because that's just telling me right there, if in a close ball game, and if it's down to the wire and it's a one-run ball game, and you got somebody who needs to get 3 outs and just get through the ninth inning, and he's got a higher than a 3-4 ERA, that's a problem. That is a big time problem. They have done a good job of keeping their strikeouts per game down, as they only have 8 strikeouts per game this year. Last year they had around 7 strikeouts per game, which was good for third in the league. So these guys aren't necessarily going up to bat and striking out. They are having productive outs from the plate where they are at least making contact. And if they can turn those outs into hits and get guys on base, they could have a better year. But I think that this is another tough year for the Angels, especially with Trout missing some time to be on paternity leave and not having him in the lineup. I think we all know what that does to their team, not to mention some injuries and guys just not performing. Now, we are, about 10, 12 games into the season or so, maybe 15, depending on, now that might be 7 or 8, depending on if your team's had any games canceled because of COVID, but still, we're about a quarter of a way through, I would give or take. Maybe a fifth of the way through. I don't know. I'm not great at percentages just off the top of my head, but still, not a whole bunch has gone by, but there's still that much less of time and that much less of games to make up and try and, change anything or turn anything around for a team in their season. So we'll see if the Angels are able to do it, but I think that they're going to just wind up in 4th place. Now, my 5th place team, and I think we all probably know who it is because I have not mentioned them, the Texas Rangers. I mean, they're the basement team in this division. They haven't been relevant since the 2016 season, and I often forget that this team went to the World Series in back-to-back years. They were very good. They had some great players back then, and I know that some guys have gotten older, some guys are no longer with the team, and like the Angels, they have a slew of guys hitting under 200 in their lineup, and if you're a team that has guys consistently hitting under the Mendoza line, that's, a terrible sign, because you're not able to get any offense. So you're relying it all on your pitching and all on your defense to hold guys and hold teams. And that just realistically, that is not possible. And as an offense, you have to do your part and you've got to produce runs. And I mean, if you got guys that are, 6, 7, 8 guys in those, 2, 3, 4 holes, 2, 3, 4 hole hitters, even their leadoff guy, they're all hitting sub 200, that is never a good sign. And this is a year, you don't want to have your first 3 of 4 batters hitting near the Mendoza line. You can't expect to get guys on base, let alone drive in those base runners, if you can't get on base to begin with. Joey Gallo is the only bright spot in the lineup, batting .270, which to have his, to have as your highest batting average, not a great sign. Not a good sign at all. He is nearing an 1,000 OPS, but having him in the bottom of the lineup doesn't really do them any good. But when, the top of their lineup is pretty thin and not producing at the plate, it gives them no added help. Why do you have Gallo as a 7-8 hitter? If he's the best hitter and he's, average-wise and OPS-wise, put him up at the 4th spot. Put him at the 5th spot. Give him an opportunity where if somebody does get on base, he's able to drive them in. And I think that's honestly one of the biggest problems. They just need to rearrange their lineup a little bit, and I think they might be a little bit better. Now, another weird anomaly that I noticed between them and the Angels, which is odd that they are 2 of the worst teams in the West, is their rotation is pretty solid. I mean, Lance Lynn, I mentioned him in the last segment. He's been off to a great start. .49 ERA, over 3 games with 24 Ks. Kyle Gibson, their number 2 guy, has a 2.45 ERA in his 2 games, but the relief pitching is a big question mark, and that is the issue, because they have a few guys that are reliable, but then they have pitchers like Edison Volquez, who's been rocked in the 3 and the 3rd innings. He's pitched with an 8.10 ERA. And again, like I mentioned about the Angels, if you have, and also the Mariners, if you've got guys that are coming into relief, they're not supposed to have higher than 3-4 ERA. They just can't, because they're supposed to be the setup guys for the 9th inning, or they're supposed to be the guys that are getting holds in the innings to make sure that, in those 7-8 pitchers are crucial, because they're able to take over from the starter and potentially get anybody out of a jam, whoever that starter might have been, and also set it up easily for the guy that's going to come in for the 9th inning. Those 7-8 guys, they're very important. So really a team that is all over the place. Not great hitting, not good relief pitching, but solid starts. This is a team, and I drew this correlation because, again, the Pirates in the Central. the starting pitching isn't really the issue. They've got good, solid starting pitching. It's the hitting that's not good and the bullpen. So could the Rangers bounce back this year and make a little run? Maybe. I don't know. But probably not. I don't see them having any firepower, really, and, that can get them anywhere higher than 5th place in the division. Maybe 4th if things, with the Angels really go south, but I really think that the Rangers still wind up in the AL West, the last place spot in that division. And it's unfortunate. Again, this is a team that, not too many years ago, they were talked about constantly. They were in the World Series. They were in the ALCS. They were very, very successful. Same thing with the Angels. They've been successful in previous years. Now, as of recently, they have not been, but again, they've been able to at least find themselves in 500 winning percentage territory, before Trout came, couple years before that, even the years when he first got there. But still, I mean, if you're not able to put together, I don't want to say the run or the performance that the team is used to doing, it's not going to work. It's just really not going to work. So I think that's how the division's going to wind up. Again, Oakland in 1st, Astros in 2nd, Mariners in 3rd, Angels in 4th, and Rangers in 5th. And right now, I mean, the A's are in 1st, the Astros are in 2nd, the Angels are 3rd, the Mariners are last, and the Rangers, they're in that 4th spot. And those last 3 teams, they can really jockey for position into trying to get that 2nd spot. And like I mentioned, the Astros, they've got a target on the back of their heads. So as a result, teams are going to be coming after them. Teams want to beat them. Teams want to dethrone the Astros, especially with all that has come out in the news about them and in the offseason and everything else. Teams are wanting their revenge, and rightfully so. I know if I was a player, I would not be too happy if I knew that a team was, cheating willingly and knowingly, and as a result, it messed up my statistics, it messed up my team, so on and so forth. So the Astros, they really have to put their money where their mouth is. And I think that the A's, if they can take advantage of this down, turn or this downtrend for the Astros, they could find themselves in 1st place. And, who knows when the last time the A's were in 1st place in the AL West, because, again, this is a team that, before 2017 or before 2018, they were not even a 500 ball club. So we'll see what happens there. I think it's going to be a very interesting year in the West. I don't think that, I don't think they're as evenly spread as the NL or AL Central, but I do think that it could make for a very interesting play out this year if the Astros and the A's really fight it out for that first, spot in the division. Could we see the Mariners and the Angels, really trying to make a little bit of a run at 2nd and 3rd? Possibly. So it'll be fun. I'm excited to watch the AL West. But that's going to wrap it up here for our 3rd segment, folks. Thanks for sticking around and tuning in to the GSMC Baseball Podcast, part of the GSMC Podcasting Network. We're going to take a quick break here, folks, but don't change that channel. We've got a fantastic final segment for you, as I'll be sharing who I believe can be a viable MVP candidates and can really have themselves a stellar year in the pandemic-shortened season. So don't go anywhere. We'll be right back here on the GSMC Baseball Podcast.
Want to know the latest in soccer? Then listen to the Golden State Media Concepts Soccer Podcast. From MLS, the World Cup, and the Premier League, we've got you covered. The latest updates, the hottest matches, and news on the league's top players. It's the Golden State Media Concepts Soccer Podcast.
David Beckham scores the goal to take England all the way to the World Cup final.
Listen now.
Hey everyone, and thanks for sticking around for the 4th and final segment here on the GSMC Baseball Podcast. Jack Ridenauer is still here, and in our last segment, I jumped into the breakdown and prediction of this year's AL West as I discussed which teams are going to land in the final standings and how I see the division shaking out this year. In our final segment here today, I'm going to get into my Who's Your MVP segment, where I'll highlight a few guys I feel could really, really have some big years. There have been many surprising players this season, like I mentioned before, that have been big surprises, but at the the same time, there have been some players that have had very expected years and could very well be legitimate contenders for the MVP award this year. I'll run down 8 guys I think could be MVP caliber players this year and potentially take home the award. First guy, young superstar Fernando Tatis Jr. 21-year-old phenom, has so much potential. I know I've mentioned him many times, but again, you got to get used to the name because he's going to be in the league for a long time. And honestly, out of all the under 25 superstars in the league, I think he's one of the top 3 players by far in that age range. No question about it. Unbelievable bat, been hitting a very high percentage this year, over 1,000 OPS and 13 RBIs already this season. He's tied for 5th in the league in runs batted in, and not to mention a great fielder who has improved his fielding since last year. He has yet to commit an error this year as opposed to last year where he committed 18 errors. So again, something that he's improved on. And if you're 21 years old and you're continuing to improve each and every single year, imagine what you're going to be doing when you're 30. And this is a guy that I think will be destined to be playing at least 10, maybe even 15 years in the MLB. I think he's got a very promising future ahead of him. His hitting numbers are very interesting. Bats 240 on the road, but that number skyrockets to 346 when he's at home. So it's obvious he does very well and much better at home, but he's coming off a great rookie year. Batted 317 last year, 22 homers. So he has that pop in his bat that can carry him to an MVP year if he keeps up this level of play. Definitely somebody to keep on the radar and to keep an eye out for. My next guy that I think could definitely win the MVP, and quite frankly, I think he's got a very legitimate shot if he continues to play the way that he's played. And I've mentioned his name many times, Nick Castellanos. And honestly, I'll mention him many more times because he is one of the better power hitters in baseball by far, and especially this season. He's leading the league in OPS at 1.212. He's batting .333, 13 RBIs. He's been a quiet player for many years, mainly because of the team he played with before he landed in Chicago last year, which was Detroit. And really, when you look at his numbers in Detroit, you kind of wonder, how was he so under the radar? He had a couple years where he was really good, and he had some very good numbers. But once he became a Cub, his numbers absolutely soared, hitting 20-plus home runs in each of the last 3 years. This is a year that could take him to a whole different level, and especially with how the MLB has been shaking out this year and how usual guys that aren't playing as well, Christian Yelich, Cody Bellinger, Jose Altuve, George Springer, some of these guys that are always household big names that have not been playing very well. This could really be an opportunity for Castellanos to take advantage of that. I mean, he's a great hitter. He does a fantastic job hitting with 1 to 2 outs. And as a team, having a guy who can come out, at the, when he's at the plate and when there's 1 to 2 outs, and it shows that he's able to get hits, he's able to generate offense. It shows that he can keep your opportunity alive of getting someone on base and hopefully scoring them. And honestly, I'm always a big guy on 2-out hitting. How does your team do with 2 outs? How does you as a player individually do with 2 outs? Because when you think about it, 2 outs is like in any sort of situational, when your back's against the wall, 30 seconds left on the shot clock, or 30 seconds left in the game clock in a basketball game, or, couple seconds left in an NHL period, couple seconds left in the NFL game, whatever it might be. If you're down to the wire like that, and I know there's no time really in baseball, but again, 2 outs, it feels like there's literally no time, and you literally have, not a whole lot of options left. You got 1 out, and that's it. And Castellanos does a great job at still getting offense done when, those 2-out situations present themselves. Great leadoff hitter. He can really set the tone for the rest of the lineup if he's able to get on base. And this will be an exciting year for Castellanos. If he can keep up this style of play, I really believe that he could potentially win the MVP, at least finish in the top 5. Who knows what his future is going to be like as a player, but I think that we're just now starting to see the ascension and the rise of Nick Castellanos as a player. Third guy that I think could potentially win the MVP, and I think he is probably a front runner right now in the AL, Aaron Judge. And this shouldn't come as a shock to anyone, really. I mean, the guy has been tearing it up the last 2 to 3 years, batting .302 so far this year, 7 home runs, which leads the MLB, a 1.199 OPS, 17 RBIs, and we aren't even at game 20 yet. So if he's doing that through 10 to 12 games, imagine what he's doing, come game 50, come game 60. They talked about guys who could potentially hit for 430 home runs. Well, Judge keeps this pace up, then he will 100% hit 30 home runs. He's on an impressive start, and I really think that he could I don't want to say have a historic year because, again, this is such an odd year that, what is considered historic, what is not, what is on the scale of a normal year, if you will. But I think overall he's going to have a year that is going to set him apart from other guys in the league. A great hitter at home. His average has jumped from July to August, which a lot of guys who have started hot have kind of fallen off a little bit. But Judge seems to be improving as the season goes on, which is a scary sign for other teams in the league. His power numbers and hitting ability and his ability to get guys on base. This is a guy who could be an MVP. If not this year, then definitely for years to come. Having all that talent from the plate, not to mention he's a pretty solid fielder. He moves pretty well in the outfield. I mean, the guy's 6'7", 6'8", 260 or 265 or whatever, and the guy moves, as nimble as possible. It's unbelievable. I mean, the guy looks like he should be playing in the NFL, and he's hitting bombs left and right. Again, 17 RBIs in not even 20 games. That is a number to really, really pay attention to. Because if you think about it, he's getting, probably, I would say, 40, let's just say 40 at-bats right now through the first 10 or so games. He's driving in 17 runs so far. That's an incredible percentage and an incredible efficiency rating of getting guys in and scoring them. So I think Judge could definitely have himself a huge year if he's able to continue this on for the rest of the season. Now, this next guy, it's going to pain me a little bit to mention him because I don't want to give any credit to the Astros after what they did in regards to their cheating scandal. But Michael Brantley, he just keeps putting up monster numbers. No matter which way you look at it, the guy is unbelievable from the plate. This year, he's at it again. He's batting .400, 1.075 OPS, but only one home run so far this year. Although the home run number might not be as high as, I think people expect or want, everything else very high. Slugging percentage is right at 600. On base percentage is nearing 500. So a guy that hits well, gets on base, coming off back-to-back 300-plus batting average years, he's primed for a ginormous year. Pretty hard to do. That's pretty hard to do when you're batting and you're putting up those kinds of numbers on a consecutive year basis and consistently. That's very challenging to do. And he's really carrying the load on this Astros team, in all honesty. A lot of the guys have been struggling this year. Brantley, he's not one of them. And the fact that he's able to continue to hit well, and if the other guys on the Astros are able to come out of their slumps, then that's, I think, when a lot of teams are going to be in trouble. And I know in my last segment I mentioned that the Astros could potentially come in second place. Well, if Brantley keeps doing what he's doing, and then all of a sudden Springer and Altuve start hitting well and mix it in with how well Carrera's been hitting, I think that the Athletics might be in a little bit of trouble because the Astros have just so much firepower. Again, they're another team that's pretty deep, just like the Yankees and Dodgers, so we could see them going pretty far if they're able to put it together and if they're able to get guys out of the slump. But Michael Brantley, he's a guy that I think could genuinely finish pretty high in the MVP race, if not win it, and he does so well hitting in any situation. Doesn't matter whether it's at home, on the road, with runners in scoring position versus lefties or righties. Doesn't matter. The guy can just flat out hit. He's a flat out professional hitter, arguably one of the best hitters in the league. And Brantley, again, if he keeps putting these numbers up, he's destined to have a monster year and could really bring him an MVP. My next guy, the old fella, he's still getting it done, Nelson Cruz. And he just seems to improve more and more as he gets older and older. The 40-year-old is having another fantastic year at the plate for the Twins, batting .373 with a 1.026 OPS, and he's 40. I can't get that, I can't get that in my mind. I can't wrap that around my head. That's incredible to see him producing like that at this old of an age. Come on, you do not see that very often. He's coming off a 41 home run season. He has 3 so far this year with 15 RBIs, not to mention his average goes up with more outs on the board. So again, a guy like Castellanos, he performs well when there is a little bit of pressure. This Twins team is going to be very dangerous, and with Cruz still hitting hard into his 40s, the Twins could find themselves walking their way into the playoffs with ease. And when I mean ease, I mean ease. Because, if Cruz is hitting 41 home runs as a 39-year-old, and he's 40 and he's still putting up big-time, high-powered numbers, I could see the guy playing until he's about 43, 44 years old. And especially if the universal DH rule sticks around, and he is in the AL, so he'll always, as long as he stays in the AL, no matter what, he will be a DH. that is such a huge perk for him, because he'll be able to stay off the field. He'll be able to rest himself in between, days or in between games or what have you, and still be very productive in the lineup and still be able to get it done from the plate, which is, again, his strong suit. So if Cruz continues to have the season that he's been having, we might see one of the oldest MVP winners, if not the oldest of all time. And I think that would be a really cool thing to see, to witness, and especially with just how odd this season is, I think that'd be a kind of a cool way to remember this year. Hey, do you remember that guy, Nelson Cruz? He won the MVP at the age of 40. I mean, talk about a guy that found the fountain of youth, and he has absolutely struck gold with that. So I think Nelson Cruz could really have himself a huge year if he continues to put these numbers up. The next guy I want to talk about, I don't want to say he's underrated, because I really don't think he is. I think that he's a guy that he's just not in the limelight that Judge is, Stanton, Altuve, Cody Bellinger, Christian Yelich. He's not an everyday guy that you hear about on ESPN nonstop 24/7, and that's fine, because you know what? He still gets it done. He still is able to go up and be productive and produce from the plate. He's a hitting machine, and that's Charlie Blackmon. I mean, a guy that I feel like, again, he deserves much more attention than he is given. He's been an all-star. He's been one of the best hitters in the MLB, and not to mention, he's actually led the league a couple times in hits. And so it's a name that you need to get familiar with if you haven't already. I mean, he is on a very, popular team, and a team that has been doing very well. But again, he's a guy that you just don't hear about all the time like Judge or Bellinger, but he still puts up big-time numbers. He only has 2 homers this year, but he has 14 RBIs, and that is where he thrives. I mean, I think he's a great guy at bringing in runs, and he has consistently been one of the leaders in hits each of the last few seasons. Like I mentioned, being able to lead the league in that category, I mean, especially with how baseball is in this day and age with all the power hitting and all the power numbers, that's a huge asset to have, especially if you're the Rockies. And the Rockies, don't count them out. I know next episode I'm going to get into the NL West. They're going to be my last divisional breakdown. I really think that the Rockies could hang with the Dodgers, and they've proved it so far this year. Again, they're sitting in first place, and Charlie Blackmon's really a big part of that, in all honesty. He's batting .396 with a .974 OPS this year, with a .500 average with runners in scoring position. So I think a very constant theme amongst all of these guys is that they're able to drive in runs at such a high rate. And again, I know it's only a quarter or so away, through of the season, 10 or so games or whatever you want to call it. But still, if you're able to show no signs of slowing down now, you don't have that much time to really slow down, if you will. I mean, you do, but at the same time, if you're being that consistent and if you are that good normally, then that's not going to be a problem. There's going to be no issues at all. And for a first-place team in the NL West, a very tough division, having Blackmon on your roster is going to be huge, down the road especially. He's hit 29 or more homers in the last 4 seasons, and again, I mean, to get to that number on a consistent basis, that's very hard to do. And I don't want to say that he's going to, win it outright and he's going to be a front runner for the MVP, but this is a guy who I think could be, a potential dark horse in the MVP race, and he could maybe make a little bit of an upset. I think that he could find himself finishing in the top 5, top 10 at least. But again, if he's a guy that is able to continue to produce like he has so far this season, I think we're going to be hearing a lot more about Charlie Blackmon, not only this year, but for many years to come. So my next guy, 32-year-old righty, Donovan Solano, he's had a ginormous year so far batting. I mean, we've talked about some guys that have had some massive years. Judge with 17 RBIs, Blackmon having a big year, Cruz being 40 years old and still putting up unbelievable numbers. But Solano is hitting .465. 13 RBIs, and a 1.153 OPS. And if anyone has a shot at coming close to finishing the year batting .400 or better, it may very well be Solano. I mean, he batted .330 last year, and this could be, a huge year for him, or this could be a fluke. Who knows? But, either way, the numbers have trended upwards for him the last few years, and he is definitely on his way towards a huge, huge season. Anything he makes contact with seems to just result in a hit, whether it's a home run, an extra base hit, a single. I mean, he's hitting .571 this year in home games. .571. That, I couldn't tell you the last time I saw a guy that was hitting over 500 this many games in, and especially with the amount of at-bats he's getting. I mean, he's an everyday guy. And if an everyday guy is already doing this much damage this consistently and this, far along into the season so far, and he's hitting 571 at home, I really don't think he's going to slow down. I think it would take a lot for him to all of a sudden just have a drastic drop-off. But, again, he's still batting, pretty solid on the road. I mean, he's near the 400 mark. He's at 364, and those are some big numbers to have. I mean, either scenario. I know that, the 571 kind of makes the 364 look a little bit small, but regardless, there's not many guys that can hit 364 on the road, let alone at home. Now, he does struggle big time against lefties. He's only batting 231, and I think that was the biggest thing that I caught in his numbers, was just how drastic of a drop-off it was between how he bats against lefties as opposed to righties. Because when he's facing righties, he's hitting 567. Again, a massive difference. Very obvious, and I'm sure a lot of coaches have made note of the drastic drop-off, and especially when he's facing righties versus a lefty. He needs to keep this production up if the Giants want to, any shot at the playoffs. They are right there in it. They're, hovering around 500. They're in striking distance, but they're going to need to get a little bit on a roll here, and I think Solano is going to be a big part of it this season, and for them to achieve that. And if he keeps putting up the numbers that he's been putting up, it's going to be a done deal for him in terms of who will take home the MVP. I think he definitely has one of the more legitimate shots at winning it, especially in the MLB, no question. And I think that's going to be a big thing for him, is whether or not he can keep this up and keep this momentum going. And if not, he might not win it, but I definitely think that he's got the potential to do it, and I think that if he continues to have the season he's having, he's going to be an MVP, no question. My last guy that I have to make note of, and again, this is a guy I've mentioned a lot before, he might be moving into one of my more favorite player, areas, if you will, because I'm just a big fan of how well he's come out this season. Again, not on my team that I root for, but I still like the way that he plays. Shane Bieber. And again, I mention him a lot, but for good reason. He's putting up monumental numbers this season. 3-0 start to the year, 0.83 ERA, 35 Ks in 21 2/3 innings. These are numbers you don't see often out of guys, especially this early in the year. At home, he is literally untouchable, has yet to give up a run, and on the road, he's only surrendered 2 runs. So someone that is moving in and out of innings with a very high efficiency, with the lack of runs given up, the high strikeout numbers, infrequency of walks, this is a guy that no question could win the Cy Young. I really think that, if we were doing a Cy Young breakdown right now, Shane Bieber would probably be my top choice in the AL. I legitimately believe that. I mean, he's putting up career-like numbers. But he could also make a huge case for an MVP. Opponents are batting 190 at home against him and 148 on the road, and when runners are in scoring position, he really buckles down and doesn't allow anything at all. No batter has had a hit on Bieber this year when a runner was on second, first and second, or first and third. So he's doing a great job at making sure teams don't capitalize on anyone being on base. And again, this is a player that I think people need to get familiar with and get used to hearing about, because not only is he a big, coming up with a big year this year, but he has a lot of potential for the future and for many years to come. Really, I think this is going to be a guy that he's going to be in the Cy Young contention for the next 5, 6, 7 years at least. He's going to be in the MVP talk for the next 5 or 6, 7 years at least. As long as he stays healthy and as long as he continues this production, I think we're going to be, Shane Bieber's going to be a household name come 2023, 2024. So there are those are the players that I feel could really be MVPs this year, and there are a lot of other guys that could also win it, and they've been having some huge years, but, these are the guys that I think that, through 2 weeks into the season, and about a quarter of the way through the year, these are some early predictions, but I think that they've made some great cases for themselves in terms of who could be the MVP and who could really win it. So it's going to be interesting to see, who's going to be crowned the best player in the league and who's going to come out on top with the MVP trophy. But I think that we're going to be in for an exciting finish, and I think, who knows? We might see some guys that rise up through the MLB that we don't usually hear about start winning some awards. And, personally, I would love to see that. I would love to see some guys that aren't in the normal conversation, like Castellanos, like Blackman, even guys like Michael Brantley, that aren't usually those household MVP caliber names that you hear thrown around all the time, but they can still get it done, and that they can still have the potential and have the capability of winning the MVP. So, folks, that's going to wrap it up for us here today on the GSMC Baseball Podcast. It was great having you all tune in. I'm really excited to keep bringing you anything and everything baseball related. And again, now about 2 weeks or so into the season, we've got, again, a lot more to look forward to. I know it's moving quickly, but just think about it. We've got more playoffs than we've ever experienced as baseball fans, and I don't know about anyone else at home, but I am very excited come postseason time. Again, thank you for listening to the GSMC Baseball Podcast, brought to you by the GSMC Podcast Network. I would like to ask that you please remember to subscribe to the show and write a nice review. That really helps us. We're always about improving and getting better, so anything that you all would like to share, please do, because we're just trying to better ourselves and give you all the best and latest news in the sports world, especially with baseball. Also, if you can please follow us on Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram to stay up to date on any posts about episodes, updates, scores, what have you. We're going to give you all that content and much more. Again, thank you so much for tuning in to the GSMC Baseball Podcast, and until next time, have a fantastic day.
You've been listening to the Golden State Media Concepts Baseball Podcast, part of the Golden State Media Concepts Podcast Network. You can find this show and others like it at www.gsmcpodcast.com. Download our podcast on iTunes, Stitcher, SoundCloud, and Google Play. Just type in GSMC to find all the shows from the Golden State Media Concepts Podcast Network, from movies to music, from sports to entertainment, and even weird news. You can also follow us on Twitter and on Facebook. Thank you, and we hope you have enjoyed today's program.